So I was looking at the grades, and around a fourth of you did not take the exam. It was posted for about 10 days. When you get an email about the exam, and I know I said something about it last time, when you see it, you need to take it. If you're waiting, I will open it up for you, but you need to tell me who you are and when you'll be able to take it before I'll extend it out for you. Okay. That's the way it is with every assignment. Go ahead.
Well, what was that? Sorry, I caught the end of that.
So about a fourth of the class did not take the first exam. And if you still want to take it, you need to email me and tell me when you'll take it, and I'll extend it out for you. Actually, let me think. Yeah, almost every semester, or especially during the fall semester, HAC has a 2-day vacation that they call fall break. And it was Monday and Tuesday. And it's usually around the middle of October every year. I've only been teaching for HAC this is my second year. And how that works is that we don't have class on Monday and Tuesday. However, the following Wednesday and Thursday is treated like a Monday or Tuesday. So we will have lecture today. Is that clear how that works? If you go and you look at the college website and pull up academic calendar, actually, this is not the right website. You come in and you look, .edu. Usually I find it easier just to search for it, academic calendar. So if you look here, it gives you all the important dates of the semester. But if you look here, it says fall break, October 18th and 19th. Classes resume on the 20th, following a Monday schedule. So if we had class yesterday, we would have had followed a Monday schedule. So we'll have lecture today, and then we will start back into lab next Thursday. Any questions or concerns?
Yes, are you going to keep labs 8, what was it, 7, 8, 9, and 10 open?
8 and 9 closed last week. I will reopen them for you, but they were ones that we did cover last week.
Oh, okay.
Anytime that we cover the material the week before, all labs are due at midnight the following Wednesday. All the labs that we do that day are due the following Wednesday.
I have a question.
Go ahead.
So I know last week you said 8, 9, and 10. We had to do 8 and 9,
Right.
and 10 was extended. I was just making sure because
Yep.
I didn't do 10.
That's
because it was
fine.
extended.
That's
Okay.
fine. I realized I actually read the syllabus wrong. And I kept thinking as I was putting that together, did I really schedule them so that we had all 3 of these labs on one day? And I looked at the syllabus after class, and I don't know if you remember as we were going through lab, I kept thinking to myself, this is a lot of material. Why are we doing all of this in one day? You know, we always cover a lot of material. This course is a lot of material. And I kept thinking, did I really, you know, when I wrote up the syllabus and when I found out the schedule for the course, did I really put this all on one day, knowing how much material there was? And I started looking at the syllabus after class again, trying to figure out why I would have done what I did, and realized that I was reading the schedule wrong.
Oh.
Because if you look here, October 14th, which was that day, we were just supposed to do 8 and 9. We're supposed to do 21, the lab exercise 10, not today, but the following week.
Okay.
And that's where I got myself all, I thought I just read it wrong because I didn't look here. I just went 8, 9, and 10. And so we will do that next week.
Okay, I got it now. I'm getting confused.
Well, I got myself all confused too. And I think it's better to do it this way. We will finish today. We will finish chapter 7. You will see that the labs will start going a lot, lecture will start going a lot faster. We will get through as many chapters as we can this semester. Lab 2 always takes a long time. And it's because it's all chemistry and a lot of it is very abstract concepts. However, the other labs are not that abstract. The nervous system is semi-abstract, but a lot of it is based on the chemistry that we covered. So we will start going through the material a little faster. Any questions, thoughts?
Professor, this is Miranda speaking.
Yep.
I took the exam twice because the first time I was trying to like break it up in 20 question increments.
Yeah.
So I could take the test over time because I was working a lot over the past couple days.
Yeah.
It shut me out actually. Like I went back later that night, couple hours later, and it shut me out. So I'm going to have a bad grade for my first attempt for sure. But I did do a second attempt then.
You should have 2 attempts.
Yes, I took the second attempt.
Oh.
I'm just letting you know that's why my first score, I don't know why it booted me out because I was under the impression like once you hit save and exit, like it would save your time and it would save but I'm guessing it still counts down the clock.
I think it does. And I have to set it up that way because I can't give you unlimited time when it comes to an online test. And I
Okay,
can't give you unlimited breaks when it comes to an online test. If I did that, nobody would remember anything. They wouldn't study beforehand. I have to do it that way.
okay,
And I give you more time than a lot of professors do. But I feel like it's just a good idea. But I have to time it.
that's okay. I just
yeah.
didn't know it continued the clock even when I saved and exited. That's what I was under,
Yeah.
like, I just didn't know that. So I just wanted to let you know, that's why my first attempt looked so badly.
If you wanted me to, I'd give you a third attempt.
I don't even know what I got on my second attempt to want the
I-
third attempt.
Why don't you look and see, and then tell me if you want to redo it? And I'll do that for this first exam. Oh, sorry, baby, come here. Sorry, my poodle just fell off my lap.
Oh, goodness.
She's fine.
So bouncy.
But if you let me know, I'll give you another attempt.
Okay. Thank you.
And I'll do that for everyone, especially with this first exam. Just let me know, and let me know when you'll have it done by, because that's kind of important. Other questions or concerns?
Do we get to see what answers we got wrong on the exam?
After everyone has taken this, I can set it up so it'll give you some feedback. But I'm not gonna do that until I want to see if more people will take it, because like I said, a fourth of the class has not taken it. And I want to do that before I need that done. I want to give them an extra week or so, and then yes, I'll set it up so you can get feedback.
I have a question too. This
Go.
is Jamie. This is Jamie, but I think my name on here is Deja. It's my daughter.
Deja.
Sorry. So if we take the test a third time, well, actually, it would only be my second, but would we only be tested on the questions we got wrong, or would it be?
No, it's gonna start it over again.
Oh, okay. When I finished mine last night, it didn't tell me what my grade was.
It
Yeah.
should now. It
It
should
does.
now.
Okay.
It should
Did
tell
like a
you-
little bit afterward. It didn't happen right
Right.
away.
Well, I
Okay.
mean, it's computers, and it's grading your score, so you may need to give it a minute to figure out what your score is.
Well, I
Oh,
think
okay.
in the online, in like the test taking for the book, what is it? The Connect, the McGraw Connect, it doesn't give you the score. It says that like, it's because it's an exam, you don't get it. But if you give it a minute on the D2L, it gives you the score like 10 minutes later, 15 minutes later.
Oh,
Thank you.
Okay. Other questions, concerns? All right. So today I want to finish chapter 7. And I want to start chapter 12. And like I said, you're going to see that things are going to start moving faster. There is a lot of material. I think that my study guides, they're long, they're very long, but they also are giving you all the material. I'm not giving you a one-page study guide because I think they can be misleading. I don't like one-page study guides because all of the material that we're learning is fair game for exams. And one-page study guides often give you a very short summary of a lot of material, and that's misleading. You can choose to use them, you can choose to not use them. But I'm not going to make them shorter. You'll see with our study guide for chapter 12 that it's really long. But if you look at the PowerPoint is 150 slides. It's not a short chapter. If you look at your chapters in the book, some of your chapters are about 100 pages. They're not short chapters. An A&P course is a lot of material. It's not for the faint of heart. And so I understand that it's a lot of material, but it's also material you have to know. And if you're choosing to go into the healthcare field, there's a lot of material to know. And this is only the beginning in your educational goals here. So I mean, when I'm told that it's a lot of material, I already know that. But if you choose to take the class, then you choose to be held responsible for that. Remember that for every hour that you're spending in class, it's estimated that you will spend 2 hours outside of class per week. And I know that some of you cannot do that, but that's what's estimated for success in the course. And so I'm not really, I'm sympathetic to your cause, but at the same time, I know this is what's required. And it's my job to do the very best to get the material to you, but it's your job to learn it. Does that make sense? The high on the exam so far is a 95. The low is a 62. And that's actually pretty good. So I'm, when I'm told that it's a lot of material, yeah, it is. It's a lot of material. But I don't really have a choice in how much material I give you, but it is your responsibility to learn it. So we're starting here. Why is this not showing up? Be patient with me for 1 second here. Oh, here it is. Let's see if this works. Nope. Let me see if I can pull it from another chapter. Of course not. I'm gonna pull it from another section for right now, because I'll tell you, this computer right now does not have access to PowerPoints. Do you guys still, can you access the PowerPoint?
I tried to print for today and it wouldn't let me. It said something about like the content is not available in this version.
Shoot. I can't use my other computer because you won't have a camera option, but this computer does not have access to PowerPoint yet. Let me try to do something really quick. Sorry about that. Let me see if it's like that for every course. Okay, it's just like that for this class. Let me see if I can't get it, my computer to set up my other computer is set up pretty quickly here. Here we go. Okay, give me one moment, all right? I'm waiting on my other computer. It's booting up here. Just a sec. I'm sorry, be patient with me for one moment. Okay, see if you can't access it now. Let's see here.
Jesus Christ.
That looks better. There we go. Okay, I don't know what happened. It worked on all the other classes last night when I uploaded a corrected version, but not on this one. Okay. Back up just a little bit. So we were on 40, 45. Okay, I'm going to back up just a little bit. I'm going to back up to ossification or osteogenesis. So ossification is the same thing as osteogenesis, which is the formation of bone. Of course, it's going to start at the very beginning. Bear with me, I'm sorry. Give me 1 second here. Endochondral ossification. Remember, chondral means cartilage. So this would be interchondral, in the cartilage ossification. So endochondral ossification, bone develops from a hyaline cartilage model. You remember hyaline cartilage, that's the glassy kind of the cartilage that makes up your nose. Bone develops from a pre-existing model. Most bones develop through this process. For example, your long bones, your vertebrae, your ribs, your scapula, pelvic girdle, your all of your bones except for the flat bones of your skull, the sternum, and the mandible. All others are going to form via this pathway. Intramembranous ossification is where osteoblasts differentiate from the mesenchyme. Remember, the mesenchyme is the embryonic, undifferentiated connective tissue. So this is where mesenchyme directly differentiates into osteoblasts. And this is all of the flat bones and most of the clavicle and the mandible and the sternum. Intramembranous ossification involves the initial formation of bone occurs on a mesenchyme membrane. So if you think membrane, mesenchyme membrane, where some of the mesenchyme starts to differentiate into osteoblasts. And osteoblasts start putting down osteoid tissue. Remember, osteoid tissue is the organic loose matrix of that then needs to be calcified before it becomes hard bone. Calcified osteoid tissue results in the entrapment of the osteocytes. And then there's continual put down of more osteoid tissue and continued calcification, resulting in a honeycomb of spongy bone with the developing periosteum. Remember the periosteum, peri meaning on the outside, osteum meaning bone. Then there's an increased filling of spaces. to form the compact bone at the surfaces, leaving spongy bone in the middle. Before we go on to the next thing, I have a video link for you. One second. So I try every once in a while when I can find really short clips of videos explaining processes, I will post them. But this is intramembranous ossification.
Hi, my name is Katie Rasmussen, and this video will be demonstrating the biological process of intramembranous ossification. Intramembranous ossification occurs during fetal development and results in the formation of flat bones, specifically those of the skull, the clavicle, and the mandible. Intramembranous ossification occurs inside fibrous connective tissue. In the connective tissue, mesenchymal stem cells come together or aggregate and then begin replicating. After adequate replication, these mesenchymal cells begin differentiating into bone-forming osteoblasts. These newly formed osteoblasts form an uncalcified bone matrix known as osteoid. The osteoid is then calcified by the addition of calcium salts and other minerals, and the enzyme alkaline phosphatase acts as a catalyst through this process. Once osteoblasts are surrounded by calcified bone matrix, they can differentiate further into osteocytes, which are mature bone cells. These osteocytes can be found in hollowed-out living spaces called lacunae. Lacunae, represented here by the black circle, are cells that support the bone in maturity. The process of bone formation is known generally as ossification, and where ossification occurs is known as the ossification center. As the process of intramembranous ossification continues, branches of bone, known as spicules, are formed through the bone's highly vascular network. These spicules will continue to grow, eventually touch.
So as the spicules continue to grow, they start to touch one another, and that's where you get the honeycomb of spongy bone being formed. Remember that spicules are part of the spongy bone. You have trabeculae and spicules.
Touching one another and growing around blood vessels. The development of bone around blood vessels allows for nutrient and waste exchange during the crucial developmental stage. Intramembranous ossification initially forms spongy bone. However, through the process of bone remodeling, the osteocytes at the edge of spongy bone can arrange themselves in tightly packed bundles called osteon. These newly formed osteon are the foundational building blocks of compact bone, which is being formed on the outside edges of the spongy bone. The layering of compact bone, spongy bone, and compact bone again are the defining characteristics of flat bones. Through a second process of bone remodeling, the inner layer of spongy bone can be removed and replaced with a medullary cavity. Inside this medullary cavity, red or yellow bone marrow can be stored. The periosteum is the outermost layer of connective tissue. The innermost portion of the periosteum is composed of fibrous connective tissue, where more osteoblasts can be produced, allowing the bone to grow in width. This concludes the process of intramembranous ossification.
So ultimately, the osteons are formed here to allow for the formation of compact bone, leaving only spongy bone in the middle. All bones formed via intramembranous ossification are what?
The flat bones.
Correct. Endochondral ossification, in contrast to intramembraneous ossification, involves a hyaline cartilage precursor model. During the early formation of the bone, all of the bones of the skeleton are initially present outside of flat bones, are initially present as hyaline cartilage precursors shapes. During the development of those bones, a bony collar forms around the outer edges. A bony collar forms around the outer edges. At this point, there's no blood vessels moving into the inner surface. There's only a bony collar that's forming. And that bony collar is kind of choking the cells inside. It forms initially, but there's no blood being able to come through. So they're not getting any nutrients inside. Remember how hyaline cartilage is very avascular. So there's no nutrients coming through. The cells in here start to enlarge. They get stressed because there's no nutrients coming in there and there's no waste leaving. So they get stressed and they start to enlarge and then they die. And at that point, blood vessels start entering in, making the first primary ossification center. But it's a little too late for the cells that have already died. But the blood vessels come in and they bring in the calcium minerals and osteoblasts. Afterwards, we get bony collars forming around the outer side. So the first bony collars formed around the diaphysis. The second bony collars are formed around the epiphyses. And the same thing occurs again. The chondrocytes, remember those are cartilage cells, chondro meaning cartilage, cytes meaning cells, start to die because the bony collar in this area is choking them. They're getting hypoxic. They have no nutrients, they have no waste leaving. And so they enlarge and then they die. And at that point, the blood vessels move in. And the blood vessels, when they come in, they bring in osteoblasts and the calcification minerals. And so that's essentially how the process occurs over time. Eventually, with long bones, the end between the epiphyses, so the secondary ossification centers are on the epiphyses, primary ossification center is in the diaphysis. The middle part, where the metaphysis is where the epiphyseal plates remain. So once again, I have a video here. I think the videos tend to be really good for these kind of processes. So bear with me just for a second here.
My job is to make. Hello, this is Kevin Petty. Welcome back for another Visual Anatomy and Physiology Smart Figure. After watching this video, you should be able to describe the process of endochondral ossification. a process that replaces the early cartilaginous skeleton with bone. The key concept to grasp is that what many think of as hard, ossified bone in the adult actually starts its development in the embryo from about 6 weeks after fertilization. This all begins with a hyaline cartilage bone model that is
I'm sorry, bear with me.
While this begins in the embryo, it's not fully completed until after puberty. Here, you can see the cartilaginous model beginning the process. When the chondrocytes at the center of the model become quite active, they increase in size and then die, leaving open spaces. Blood vessels invade this area, and osteoblasts in the periphery lay down a superficial layer of bone. Fibroblasts delivered by the blood vessels in the central region differentiate into osteoblasts and begin to produce spongy bone at what is called the primary ossification center. Over time, the primary ossification center undergoes remodeling that results in a medullary cavity. This process repeats in multiple secondary ossification centers located at the epiphyses. The epiphyses will retain a thin layer of articular cartilage. This will remain in the adult and is what covers the ends of your bones today. Epiphyseal cartilage, also called the epiphyseal plate or growth plate, separates the epiphyses from the diaphysis. Lengthwise growth of the bone is regulated by this epiphyseal plate as chondrocytes on the epiphyseal side of the plate continue to divide and enlarge, while those on the side of the diaphysis die. Osteoblasts migrate to this region and increase bone length by laying down bone. At puberty, various hormones cause the epiphyseal plate to be fully replaced with bone. This epiphyseal closure signals the end of skeletal growth. An X-ray can reveal if the epiphyseal plate is open or closed. In the skeletally immature, open plates are obvious, as the cartilage is not visible in this X-ray. In the adult, a distinct epiphyseal line is apparent.
They can often use the X-rays of hands to determine whether a skeleton was a child or an adult based on the fusion of the epiphyseal plates. I over the summer and right now a little bit, I'm trying to learn a little bit about anatomical forensics. And a lot of that has to do with the bones. And I'm learning that there's a lot more to the skeleton than I thought there was. If you remember, there's about 206 bones in the human's adult skeleton. In the new baby, there's approximately 300. Because a lot of your bones are not fully formed until you're oftentimes into your teens, into your 20s. Your scapula starts out as about 7 different bones and slowly all fuses into one bone. It's very fascinating to me. I realized how little I know. Well, of course, it's going to start at the very beginning. So just a comparison and contrast between endochondral ossification and intramembranous ossification. Endochondral ossification is a type of ossification that takes place from centers arising, so remember those secondary ossification centers arising in cartilage involving the deposition of lime salts, calcium and phosphate salts in the cartilage matrix, followed by secondary absorption and replacement by true bony tissue. Intramembranous ossification is the development of osseous tissue within the mesenchymal tissue without a prior cartilage intermediate. Cartilage in endochondral ossification is formed first and the bone is laid down on it. In intramembranous ossification, the bone is formed directly from the mesenchyme. Endochondral ossification proceeds through an intermediate cartilage intermediate. Intramembranous ossification does not form intermediate cartilage. Endochondral ossification is important in the formation of long bones. Intramembranous ossification is the formation of flat bones. Intramembranous endochondral ossification takes a lot longer time to form a bone. Intramembranous ossification takes less to form a bone. Endochondral ossification stops at about year 2. Intramembranous ossification stops at about 18 in females and 21 in males. I think it can actually occur for a little longer than that, according to what I've been reading, because your clavicle can actually grow for quite a while into your 20s. Which of the following bones are not formed by the picture shown below? So first, what is that picture showing? Is it intramembranous ossification or endochondral ossification?
Would that be the endro?
Radius.
Say it again. Say it again.
I said it would be intramembranous.
It's actually endochondral.
Is it?
Yep.
Okay, I see the difference.
So which bones are formed of this list here? Which of these bones is not formed via endochondral ossification?
The clavicle?
It's the clavicle, correct. The process of intramembranous ossification generates bone within a pre-existing template composed of mesenchymal tissue. In contrast, endochondral ossification generates bone within a pre-existing template composed of what?
Island cartilage?
Correct. Which characteristic of cartilage enhances its job as the precursor to endochondral bone?
D.
You said B is in Bravo or
Sorry, D.
D? I think that sounds like a good one. Yes. That sounds like the right choice. So moving forward, are there any questions about intramembranous ossification or endochondral ossification?
No.
Bone growth and remodeling. Ossification continues throughout life with growth and remodeling of bones. Bones are constantly being broken down and reformed. They grow in two different directions. They grow in length and they grow in width. Interstitial growth is growth from within, where the bones are going to grow in length overall. Chondrocytes within the bone divide and secrete new matrix from within lacunae. Remember how chondrocytes, just like osteocytes, live within lacunae. Appositional growth is growth from outside that's going to result in growth in width of the bone, where the chondroblasts in the perichondrium secrete matrix on the surface of pre-existing bone. Perichondrium meaning on the surface or on the sides. This adds various protuberances that eventually are going to be shaped by bone to create the final shape of the structure. So this appositional growth is growth in width, has to do with the formation of the various bony marquee protuberances. Interstitial is growth in length. So interstitial growth is present from the, interstitial growth has to do with the epiphyseal plates. Epiphyseal plates are present from infancy to adolescence and the metaphyses, so in between the diaphysis and the epiphysis. These function as growth zones. They're regions of transition from cartilage to bone. They consist of hyaline cartilage and transitional zones metaphyses on either side. So remember where you have hyaline cartilage, you have it in the epiphyseal plates and you have it on the surfaces of bones, joints. And so one of these is the epiphyseal plates where we get bone growth in length. Looking at an enlargement of part of the epiphyseal plate or half of the epiphyseal plate. The most inner part of the epiphyseal plate is a zone of reserve cartilage, resting hyaline cartilage. The second zone is a zone of cell proliferation where the chondrocytes are multiplying and lining up in rows. So they're multiplying and they're lining up. Afterwards, their multiplication or mitosis stops and the chondrocytes start to hypertrophy, meaning they get bigger and the walls of the lacunae are thinning down. Then there's a temporary calcification of the cartilage matrix that's forming the lacunae. Afterwards, the lacunae are broken down, the walls are broken down, leaving open channels, and death of the chondrocytes occurs, and then bone deposition is deposited by the osteoblasts, forming the trabeculae of spongy tissue. So growth of cartilage, and then the replacement of cartilage by bone tissue in the diaphyseal side of the epiphyseal plate. So cartilage here is not turned into bone. It's replaced by bone in a kind of a complicated process. So the cells start to divide. Then they enlarge and division stops. And then and when they start to enlarge, there's a thinning of the lacunae walls separating the chondrocytes. Then there's a calcification of those walls of the lacunae. And then those walls start breaking down, leaving open channels. And the bone is deposited by osteoblasts, forming the trabeculae of spongy bone. So chondrocyte multiplication in zone 2 and zone 3, remember this is where it's actively dividing, this is where it's enlarging, continually are pushing zone 1 towards the ends of the bone. One towards this end, one towards this end. So that the bone will elongate. In the lower limbs, this process causes a person to grow in height. In the upper limbs, this causes a person to grow proportionately. Any questions here? Interstitial growth is what we're watching here when we talk about what's going on at the epiphyseal plates. Once the epiphyseal plate is depleted of cartilage, the primary and the secondary marrow cavities unite, and the junction region is called the epiphyseal line. A lot of times you can think of interstitial growth as being a variation of endochondral ossification. Because if you remember, all of the bones that have epiphyseal plates in them are formed by an endochondral ossification. And that's where the epiphyseal plate forms, is from some of the chondrocytes that were present during the early development. Damage to the epiphyseal plate can result in shorter bones in adulthood, since damage to the cartilage can accelerate closure of the epiphyseal plate. One way to think about that is this is a very ordered process. We have 5 different zones. Damage to these zones can result in inflammation and early ossification just through the healing of the break. This is why they worry about when a child breaks a bone, a long bone, and they break it near the epiphyseal plate. Is because we don't want these epiphyseal plates to close early. During bone growth, which event is most significant at the surface indicated by the letter A?
Is it B?
Not B so much. B is in Bravo. Because where's the articular cartilage found? It's found up here. Maybe C. cartilage, conversion of cartilage into bone, about right there. What is seen by picture B?
Would it be B? B as in dog?
I think you're right. That sounds right to me. What would long bone growth look like in an individual whose cartilage in the epiphyseal plate stopped dividing?
See?
B is in Bravo or C is in Charlie?
Charlie.
Probably not, because this is growth in length. But you're close. What else? What other answer could it be?
B.
B is in Bravo. So yeah, the growth in, this is always going to be growth in length. Anytime the epiphyseal plate is involved, it's growth in length. Human growth hormone abnormalities can result in calcification of extracellular bone matrix. Giantism is a condition characterized by excessive growth resulting from the hypersecretion of human growth hormone before the closure of the epiphyseal plates. Sometimes they never stop closing. They never close. It's usually a connective tissue disorder that eventually will lead to heart failure. Because just like dogs with really long limbs are usually die from heart failure because you can't maintain the blood flow. Dwarfism, abnormally short height in childhood due to hyposecretion, so not enough growth hormone before closure of the epiphyseal plates. Acromegaly is hypersecretion of growth hormone after epiphyseal plates have closed, resulting in very heavy bones. Achondroplastic dwarfism is where the long bones stop growing in childhood, but the growth of other bones is not affected. So normal length torso and short limbs. It's the failure of the cartilage to grow in the metaphyses. So remember that zones 2 and 3 are multiplication and enlarging. Remember that the pituitary is what's secreting growth hormone. So disproportionate dwarfism is caused by an orthopedic reason for having short limbs with abnormal proportions. This is specifically, we're looking at achondroplasia. This one right here. Pituitary or proportionate dwarfism is the lack of growth hormone where they're normal portions with short stature. Bone growth in thickness, oppositional growth. So this is growth of width. So ridges in the periosteum start to create grooves for blood vessels. Remember, the periosteum is the outer lining. So it starts to create grooves for blood vessels. The periosteal ridges then fuse, forming endosteum-lined tunnels. Remember how all the central canals of osteons are lined with endosteum. Osteoblasts in endosteum build concentric lamellae inward toward the center of the tunnel, forming the osteons. Bone grows outward as the osteoblasts in the periosteum build new circumferential lamellae. Any questions about appositional growth? So this is the formation of new osteons by the periosteum. Because you initially get the central canal forming, and then the bone continues to grow outward as new outer lamellae or circumferential lamellae are being laid down. So bones continually grow in diameter and thickness with appositional growth by the deposition of new bone tissue. This is similar to intramembranous ossification. Remember, that's where we get a lot of osteoblasts being present. So osteoblasts in the periosteum are depositing osteoid tissue, which then become trapped as osteocytes. The newborn is formed on the surface of old bone. The result is that there are increased numbers of circumferential lamellae. The marrow cavity is also widened by resorption by osteoclasts at the endosteum. So this is also broken down and widened, the inner part of the bone. So bone remodeling is an ongoing replacement of old bone tissue by new bone tissue that occurs throughout adulthood. Osteoclasts are breaking down bone through removing minerals and collagen fibers from the bone. Osteoblasts are laying down minerals and collagen fibers to the bone. 10% of the bone is replaced yearly, with bone remodeling repairing microfractures, releasing minerals into the blood and reshaping the bones. Any questions? An important law in the formation and remodeling of bone is what we call Wolff's Law of Bone, which means that the bone's architecture and the bone structure is determined by the mechanical stresses put on it. This is one of those examples of a complementarity of form and function. The trabeculae, remember that the trabeculae are the bars inside the medullary spongy bone, lie along the stress lines placed on the femur or any bone that's under stress. An application of a compression force to the top of the bone, to one of the ends of the bone, results in a slightly bent bone. Remember, we have the cartilage, which gives the bone a lot of flexibility. And then we have the calciums that cause the rigidity of the bone. So it produces a slightly bent bone that has a greater compressible force on the outside curvature. So there's more of an increased force here. This produces weak electrical currents that run through the bone. Over time, bone on the outer curvature is going to be broken down by osteoclasts, while new bone on the inner curvature is going to be deposited. With the final result meaning a straighter and stronger bone. So bony processes will grow larger and grow stronger in response to mechanical stress. For example, your calcaneus, the bone of your heel, is the strongest bone in your body. Why would you think it would be the strongest bone in your body? It has the most weight put on it. You think about it for a moment. That bone in your heel is constantly having weight put on it. That makes it the strongest bone in your body. So the remodeling of bone is a collaborative and due to precise action of osteoclasts and osteoblasts. So this constant interaction and balancing act. Changes in the mechanical stress are detected by the osteocytes and communicated to the osteoblasts, which increase the synthesis of the osteoid, which is then calcified. Some examples of this: infants and toddlers have relatively smooth bones. As they start to walk, their bones develop a variety of surface bumps, ridges, and spines. The greater trochanter of the femur is stimulated to grow. I know, I'm moving, huh? So the greater trochanter of the femur stimulated to grow by the pull of the muscles on that part of the bone. Remember, this is appositional growth, growth in width, to pull out bony protuberances. The next one that they talk about next example there, external occipital protuberance. Initially, it's not present. It's that in the new baby, that is not formed. But as a baby starts to be able to hold up their head and sit up and stand up on their own, that protuberance becomes enlarged as the muscles pull on it. So there's a constant balance between, bear with me here, constant balance between the actions of the osteoclasts and the osteoblasts. If too much new bone is formed, the bones become abnormally thick and heavy. This is acromegaly. Bones can become too flexible because you don't have enough minerals being deposited, such as in rickets and osteomalacia. An excessive loss of calcium from the bone weakens the bones. An example being osteoporosis. Excessive breakdown and formation of bone, followed by disorganized bony remodeling, causes the bones to weaken, resulting in pain, misshapen bones, and fractures because the bone formation is not organized correctly. Diet affects bone growth and remodeling. Large amounts of calcium and phosphorus and small amounts of magnesium, chloride, and manganese are required for bone growth and remodeling. These minerals are deposited in the bone and withdrawn when needed. Vitamins A stimulates the activity of osteoblasts. Vitamin C is necessary for collagen fibers to be put down. Vitamin D helps build bone by increasing the absorption of calcium from foods in the intestinal tract. Vitamins K and B12 are needed for the synthesis of bone proteins. I'm guessing like the aminoglycans. Vitamin D deficiencies can result in inadequate extracellular bony matrix. So remember that vitamin D is involved in, if you look here, involved in the absorption of calcium from foods in the intestinal tract. So specifically working in the small intestines. Rickets is a disease of growing bones where before the fusion of the epiphyseal plates. Due to unmineralized matrix, so not unhardened matrix or just uncalcified osteoid, there's a softening of the bones in children, potentially leading to fractures and deformity. Osteomalacia is where the new form bone during remodeling fails to calcify, resulting in pain and tenderness. Circulating hormones affect bone growth and bone remodeling. Hormones, human growth hormone, generally involved in the growth of all body tissues, including bone. Sex hormones, estrogens and testosterones. involved in the bone building activity, stimulating the bone building activity of osteoblasts. Insulin and thyroid hormones promote normal bone growth and maturity. Parathyroid hormone promotes osteoclast activity. Calcitonin prevents and blocks that, inhibits the activity of osteoclasts. And thereby stimulates bone deposition by slowing its removal. From birth through adolescence, more bone is produced than is lost during remodeling. In adults, the rates are the same. So in children, more bone is put down than what's removed. In adults, the rates are equal. As much bone that's the rate at which bone is being put down equals the rate at which it's being broken down. In older individuals, especially postmenopausal women, there's a decrease in the amount, the rates that bone is being built up, and breakdown is occurring faster than the bone is being built up. Which is how osteoporosis forms. So osteoporosis is defined as a loss of bone density. Bone resorption outpaces bone deposition. So the amount of bone being broken down is happening faster than the amount by which the bone is being built up. Spongy bone has the greatest surface area, so it gets most affected by osteoclasts breaking down the bone. Causes of osteoporosis can be estrogen deficiency, inactivity, low calcium intake, and vitamin D deficiency. So the best ways to prevent osteoporosis are weight-bearing exercises, calcium and vitamin D supplements, and personally, I'm all for hormone replacements when I get to that point in my life. As my mom goes, booyah in the background. So the body is the bone's major calcium reservoir, containing about 90% or 98% of the body's total calcium amounts. A normal blood plasma level for calcium is about 9.2 to 10.4 milligrams per deciliter. Hypocalcemia is a deficiency of blood calcium. Hypo always means below. So hypocalcemia is a deficiency in blood calcium, causing an inexcessive excitability of nervous system, muscle spasms, and tremors. Hypercalcium is an excess of blood calcium, causing excessive depression of the nervous system. Which of the following is a function of calcium in the body? The answer here is that all of these are important rules. So nerve cells require extracellular calcium ions. Calcium is a cofactor needed for many enzymes. Calcium is required for blood clotting. Calcium is needed for muscle cells for contraction. And you know what? I don't want to take a full 10-minute break, but let's take 5 minutes starting right now and come back at 11:06 and move around for a second, and then we'll come right back to here and we'll finish out chapter 7 and start chapter 12.
I've been on my phone on Zoom, but I'm going to change back to my laptop. If you can just set me back in, then
I will, of course.
Okay.
I adjusted the file. All the other classes have loaded from it, except for this class. So I had to reload. Which meant turning on the other. For your daughter who never votes. You can say shit on me. Decided that in December, I'm gonna go out. Yeah, and put this into a different pot. It's essentially outgrowing that pot. It's some more space. Maybe you'll all be like to be like, it's so pretty. It is. And so I'm like, I don't care. I just want to be. I want it, your cat to start climbing in it and just go. I want it to just continue thriving. And it's what it's, I mean, it goes through. When it's going through water so that's right. Constantly. I can see you feel that I feel that too. Maybe even over Thanksgiving stuff, I'll be shopping by some stuff there. Evan, you're all right, buddy. Okay, so mineral deposition. So the crystallization process that deposits calcium and phosphate and other ions. Remember, this is the hydroxyapatite. So the osteoblasts lay down the collagen fibers that spiral along the osteome. Remember how they spiral in opposite directions in each of the concentric lamellae. And then the collagen fibers getting crusted with hydroxyapatite that hardens the matrix. If you've ever built a crystal, they start with a seed crystal that then continues to get built on top of it, and more minerals and more crystalline structures keep building on the initial seed crystal. This is occurring the same way. The more a crystal builds, the more ions it attracts. So this would be an example of the positive feedback loop. The more it builds, the bigger it gets, the larger the rate of building. And in contrast, the mineral resorption that occurs via the osteoclast is where we dissolve bone to release the minerals into the blood. Remember how the osteoclasts have a ruffled layer, and they kind of reside within the absorption base that they create as they break down the bone. They have calcium receptors that sense when there's a low calcium blood level, when we get hypocalcemic, which then secretes hydrogen ions into the resorption base that gradually works to activate proteases to break down the collagen and release the minerals. So osteoclasts are stimulated by calcium levels in the blood to secrete hydrogen ions into these bays that then break down the collagen and release the minerals. Which of the following best describes the process of bone resorption in bone remodeling?
Would it be A?
It's A, Genesis, you're right. So acids and enzymes released by osteoclasts degrade the collagen and dissolve away minerals, which diffuse into the interstitial fluid. Remember, that's the fluid in between cells, into nearby blood capillaries. Calcitriol is one of the minerals or molecules that is involved in calcium absorption and calcium deposition. It's a form of vitamin D that's produced sequentially in the skin from ultraviolet light. Then it gets altered, that the dehydrocholesterol is converted into cholecalciferol, which is then converted in the kidneys into calcitriol, which is the active form of vitamin D. And this results in increased abilities to absorb bone. Absorb calcium from the intestinal tract. So calcitriol increases calcium absorption by the small intestines, increases calcium resorption from the skeleton by binding to osteoblasts and stimulating stem cells to differentiate into osteoclasts, and weakly promoting the resorption of calcium in the kidneys, so less calcium is lost in the urine. So preventing calcium from being lost in the urine. So increased calcium absorption, increased calcium release from the bones by stimulating osteoclast formation and preventing osteoblasts from taking calcium out of the blood to put into bone. And helping to prevent loss of calcium via the urine, therefore keeping more of the calcium in the blood. So the end result is that increased calcium levels in the blood. Calcitonin works in contrast to calcitriol. Calcitonin is secreted from parafollicular cells within the thyroid gland. So these specifically, here's your thyroid gland. The parathyroid gland is just on each side of the thyroid. So here's your thyroid, parathyroid gland. These have an important role calcitonin has an important role in children, but only a weak effect in adults. It reduces osteoclast activity, so there's less calcium being removed from the bones, and increases the number of osteoblasts, so there's more calcium being deposited in the bones. So this is going to remove calcium from the blood. The end result is calcitonin removes calcium from the blood. Calcitriol increases the amount of calcium in the blood. So when there's excessive amounts of blood calcium, calcitonin is secreted. It reduces the activity of osteoclasts, resulting in less bone being broken down, and increases the amount of osteoblast activity, resulting in more bone being built up. Correcting hypercalciemia, remember that's when the blood calcium levels are too high. So calcitriol is a hormone that raises the blood calcium levels. Remember how it stimulates the absorption in the intestinal tract. It increases the amount of osteoclasts and prevents osteoblasts from functioning, and has an effect on the kidney by reducing how much calcium is lost through the urine. So the result is that it overall increases the amount of blood calcium. Calcitonin inhibits osteoclast activity through reducing bone resorption and stimulates osteoblasts to deposit calcium into the bone. So it's essentially going to lower blood calcium levels. Parathyroid hormone works similarly to calcitriol in that it's going to raise blood calcium levels. Calcitonin lowers blood calcium levels. Calcitriol raises blood calcium levels. Parathyroid hormone is also going to raise blood calcium levels. Parathyroid hormone during hypocalcemia. Parathyroid hormones secrete parathyroid hormone. Parathyroid binds to receptors in the osteoclasts and kidneys that promote bone resorption, bone breakdown, and promote the kidneys to retain more calcium and have less being excreted in the urine. The last step, and if you remember, the last step of calcitriol synthesis is also occurs here. So remember, this is vitamin D, so it's involved in bone absorption. So calcitriol is also going to enhance calcium levels going up. Collagen synthesis is inhibited by osteoblasts, which inhibit bone deposition. So parathyroid hormone glands secrete parathyroid hormone. Parathyroid hormone binds to receptors on the osteoclast, which increase bone resorption and has an effect on kidneys. So kidneys will start to retain more calcium from the urine. And produces more citriol. And the result is that we have increased calcium in the blood. So increased parathyroid hormone results in increased blood calcium levels. In a patient whose parathyroid hormone glands have been removed, you would expect that that person's blood calcium levels to be what?
Would it decrease?
Why do you think it would decrease?
Because doesn't the parathyroid hormone increase the blood calcium levels?
Yeah.
So if you take out the parathyroid glands, it would decrease the blood calcium levels.
Right, good job. So parathyroid hormone is going to increase osteoclast activity, resulting in more bone breakdown, resulting in blood calcium levels going up. It's going to reduce the amount of osteoblast activity, so it's going to reduce how much calcium is being taken out of the blood to put into bone, resulting in more blood calcium remaining in the blood. It's going to cause more urinary excretion of phosphate, preventing hydroxyapatite formation. Remember, that's the calcium phosphate salts, which results in less hydroxyapatite being made, resulting in more blood calcium. And it's going to cause less calcium to be excreted via the urine, resulting in more blood calcium staying in the blood. Phosphate homeostasis is vital to DNA and RNA, and ATP and phospholipids and other component formation. Remember how the DNA and the RNA have a sugar phosphate backbone, and the phospholipids found in the cell membrane, ATP with its 3 phosphate groups. So the average adult has 500 to 800 grams of phosphorus with 85% or 90% of the moles. The plasma phosphorus levels range from 3.5 to 4 milligrams per deciliter. So phosphate levels are regulated via calcitriol. Remember, that's vitamin D. Results in more calcium being stored, more phosphate being stored in the bones. And parathyroid hormone is going to regulate whether or not it's excreted in the urine. Any questions? Orthopedics is the branch of medicine dealing with the prevention or correction of injuries, disorders of bone, joints, and muscle. This also includes the design of artificial joints and limbs and the treatment of athletic injuries. An open fracture is one in which the broken ends of a bone protrude through the skin. A closed fracture does not break the skin. Four basic types of fractures. There's a non-displaced fracture, which is where the bone pieces remain in proper alignment. There's a displaced fracture where at least one bone is shifted out of alignment. There's a comminuted, thank you, Mom, comminuted, where one bone is broken into 3 or more pieces. And a green stick fracture where the bone is incompletely broken on one side, more common in children breaks, because the bones are still developing. Basic healing from a fracture. The first phase is an inflammatory phase where extensive bleeding occurs. You remember there's a lot of bone marrow in here and there's a lot of blood vessels. And of course it hurts because there's a lot of nerves involved. Remember how that periosteum has a lot of nerves in it. So immediately after the fracture, there's an extensive amount of bleeding. And over a period of several hours, a large blood clot or a fracture hematoma develops. In the next phase, this is a reparative phase that includes the formation of a fibrocartilaginous callus that forms, and then a bony callus forms second. So this is a soft callus, and then we're going to get a harder callus being formed. Then there's a bone remodeling where the bone callus is remodeled. This healing can take months because calcium and phosphate deposition is a slow process. Any questions so far?
No.
A closed reduction is where bone fragments are manipulated back into position without surgery. An open reduction is where there's a surgical exposure of the bone and the use of plates, screws, and plates or pins are used to really realign the fragments. This right here, and you see it says my most current panoramic. I don't think I've talked about it in this class or not. But just a little over 20 years ago, I was in a head-on car collision. And when I was in this head-on car collision, I broke my lower jaw in 4 places. And I broke it. This is a dental panoramic. And I broke it. Look, and I'm going to stop sharing just for a moment here. So I broke it right here. And I broke it right here. And it was a pretty, probably the most traumatic experience I've ever had in my life up to this point. So I sometimes get a little emotional when I even think or talk about it. I think my mom will tell you it was probably one of the scariest things she's probably been through too, because she got to be involved. You want to tell her, Mom?
The ugly part is having me twice in the hospital.
Oh, I coded twice in the hospital too. But what happened was that I was sitting too close to my steering wheel. I was wearing a seatbelt, and I was on one of the busiest freeways in the Phoenix, Arizona area. And they blamed it on mechanical failure of my car. And I went across 4 lanes of traffic in a perpendicular direction and hit the median on the other side head on. And I'm guessing I was going around 35 to 45 miles per hour. And I was sitting too close to my steering wheel. In a head-on collision, if you are within a foot of your steering wheel, you will go forward into your steering wheel. And that's what happened. And so I broke it right here. I broke it right here. I broke it right here, and I broke it right here. This little plate right here was essentially to stabilize the bone from the break across my chin. You can almost see where approximately where that break would have been. I think these little wires were just to help stabilize too. These little chains up here, these little chains up here were because I was born with a cleft lip and palate. And so when I was about 12, 13 years old, they went in and took, because the cleft lip and palate means that your palate fails to form. You are left with your maxilla, your two parts of your maxilla don't come in close. And the result is that you're left with a gap up in your palate. And so I had braces for several years. Probably I started wearing them in second grade. I finally got them off when I was about 14. And the only reason they finally took them off was if they went in and put bone up in my palate, because my orthodontist realized that he could not stabilize my teeth and get them to stop shifting unless I had more bone up in my palate. And so when I was about 12 or 13, they went and took bone from my hip and put it up in my palate. At the same time that they did this, they put these little chains in to stabilize that graft and hold it in there. At the same time that they did this, they surgically broke both of my jaws. So this was 12, my age 12 or 13. They went in and they surgically broke both of these jaws and shifted them to help with a bite issue. And then when I was 27 was when I decided to throw my car into a median. And then, as a result, I broke my lower jaw again. You know, yeah, if you're gonna do something, you might as well do it really well. And the result now is that my teeth, if you look, and you can't see it really, really well here, but I am slowly losing my bottom teeth. You can kind of see that these two little teeth right here are just barely staying in the bone. This little bone, this tooth back here, I still have it, but it's barely staying in there. I can move it very, very easily. And I'm trying to keep my teeth as long as I can. It's kind of like straightening the chairs on the Titanic. You know, it's all, eventually the ship's going to sink, but you keep trying to take care of your teeth the best you can for right now. I've not had any cavities in easily 6 or 7 years. I just don't get cavities anymore because I take exceptionally good care of my mouth. But even though I'm doing that, I'm still going to lose these teeth, and I'm gradually losing these teeth down here. And the reason for why I'm continually losing these teeth, part of it was because of the initial break and the fact that the bone remodels. And as the bone remodels, it's kind of narrowed out my chin, maybe a little bit more, and squished those teeth, and it's squishing them out. However, I've learned, you know, just recently, every time I go to the dentist right now, I learn something new. Every time I go into the dentist, I learn that part of the issue here is that my teeth are much better in line. They're better, more stable over here than they are over here. And my roots are a lot more shallow over here than they are here. And I've learned just recently why that's the case. When I knew when they fixed my break, this multi-break, that my jaws were out of alignment. I have a permanently dislocated jaw because of the out of alignment here. And I knew almost probably within about 2 months of afterwards, maybe 3 months afterwards, that the jaws they weren't right. There was something incorrect about them. And I ended up having a major fight with my surgeon about it, because he was like, well, that's the way it was before. And you know, and in my head, I'm thinking, you don't even know what, you didn't meet me until after I wrecked my car. So how do you know what it was like before? And the result is that on this side of the jaw, or it's either this side or this side, one of my temporal mandibular joints is dislocated, and not completely, but just enough that it's altered my bites. And my teeth, with me. Oh no, don't do that. My teeth are shifted over here. And the result is that every time that I bite down, these teeth are being pushed this way. And so every time that I bite down, I'm pushing them more out of place. And I'm essentially pushing them so they're going into a perpendicular, assuming a horizontal direction instead of a vertical direction. And so this is why I'm gradually, even though these teeth over here are fairly stable, these teeth here are slowly just coming out. They're becoming more and more unstable as time goes on, is because of just the way I'm biting. And they did look at one point right after, you know, when I realized that when I finally got another healthcare provider to agree with me that my jaw was dislocated and out of alignment, I got someone to look at it again, and they thought about going in and re-breaking my jaw and putting it back into position. And they realized at that point that with how many times I'd had my jaws broken at this point, which was twice, if they broke my jaw again, I might lose all my bottom teeth, because the bone remodeling that keeps occurring every time you get a break. And so at this point, it's never going to happen, because I would prefer to fight with my bottom teeth, because these teeth are actually fairly stable. This tooth is fairly stable. This tooth is semi-stable. I don't want to lose more teeth. And so I just prefer to leave them the way they are and know that eventually they're probably going to all come out down here, but leave them the way they are for right now. Any questions? And so the car wreck occurred May 30th of 2001. So just almost exactly 20 years ago.
So could you sue your surgeon
that
I
after-
probably, I could, if I really wanted to, I could, maybe. My mom says not now. Statute of limitations. But I also, he did an amazing job at putting my jaw back together. He was dealing with a train wreck when he got in there. Because if you look at the mandible, it's not a very big bone. And my mandible is smaller than this mandible is. It's not a very big bone. And to break it in 3 places is pretty massive. So actually, was it 3 places? It wasn't 3 places, it was 4 places. I broke it here. I broke it here, I broke it here, and I broke it here and here. So 4 places altogether. I thought 3 doesn't sound right. And I also, I didn't mention, I had an open fracture. So if you look, I don't know how well you're going to see it, but on the very underside of my chin here, I have about a 1-inch scar because my the jaw came out the bottom, and so it was actually coming down like this. And I realized after recovering from all this fun stuff that I have scars all the way through here, because I don't know if I had, if it came out through the inside of my mouth, or if that was a way that he went in there to try to get the pieces together. But I do remember that when I broke it, there was a lot of blood. And so I'm guessing that it came out down here, but it may have also come out into my mouth. And there was a lot of blood. And so in my head, I think he was dealing with a train wreck when he got in there. I can't imagine how much was going on. I mean, I know that I have teeth that are still broken from that accident. And enamel is one of the hardest minerals. It's the hardest protein in your body. And breaking as many teeth as I did, that was an amazing hit. I'm glad I don't remember it. I remember hearing my car crunch, and then I remember coming back up into my stair, sitting up after I'd done it. But I don't remember actually going forward and hitting my steering wheel. But I thought, how many teeth I broke in there, and I probably easily broke. I'm sorry, I'm counting in my mouth a little bit. About 6 or 7 teeth. And so, in my head, I think, I actually came out of this looking pretty good. I wouldn't go after him for that reason, was because I'm pretty sure that the cut was farther up than what he did, where it is now. And I remember asking him when I was laying in pre-operating room and waiting to be going for surgery, and meeting him for the first time and asking him, pointing to my chin and saying, with my broken jaw and everything, saying, can you minimize the scarring of this if you can? Because I knew it was a nasty break. I knew I had a major cut across my face. And he smiled at me and he says, I'm going to do the best I can. And to this day, nobody can even see that scar unless I show it to you. And so I would not go after him. And because I gave him a rather complicated case to start out with. And he did an amazing job with putting it back together. And I'm grateful to still be here. I think, and the story's hard for me to tell a little bit. I don't know if you can tell, I've got a little emotional. But it is an amazing story. And I asked, every time I go in to see a new dentist, they're always stunned when they look at my panoramic. And so I asked for it. I asked for a copy of it. Because I always, they're always just blown away by how much is going on in my mouth. I like to think of myself as being maybe the Terminator, because there's just so much metal in there. So no, I wouldn't go after him. I came out doing really well, and like my mom said a second ago, and maybe later in the semester, I'll tell you about the rest of the adventure, more about the adventure, but I coded twice while I was in the ICU, and once in the recovery room right after the first surgery. I stopped breathing. And then I went into what's called a respiration suppression from an opioid overdose 5 days after I'd been there. And we'll talk about that maybe later. But I'm grateful to still be around. I'm grateful that I didn't struggle with any brain damage, especially after the second coating, because that was a possibility. And it provides with some amazing stories. And these are great stories when you're teaching anatomy and physiology. And it's taught me a lot. Last slide of this is just looking at some additional diseases. Osteosarcoma is bone cancer. Osteogenesis imperfecta, we talked about that a little bit before, but that's where the bones are excessively brittle, a defect in the collagen. Osteomyelitis is an inflammation of the osseous tissue resulting from a bacterial infection. And osteotitis deformans is an excessive proliferation of osteoclasts and resorption of the excessive bone. So remember, this is, we kind of talked about this before, but this is where the bones are, the bone remodeling is fast and disorganized. Any questions about chapter 7?
Is there a cure for brittle bone disease?
Not as far as I know. Cure for brittle bone disease. Osteogenesis imperfecta. It's a genetic disorder. Right now, no. I'll bet you money, though, that they are looking at gene therapies for it. I remember when I went to elementary school, I had there was a young man that I went to school with who had it, and he got at least one bone break a year, all the way through elementary school. And there's a large range. Some of them result in, I think there's about 4 different types of osteogenesis imperfecta. And the most severe is an embryonic lethality. So it's just not viable for life. It's not compatible to life. But I would bet money that they're looking at gene therapies for it right now. Other questions? So moving on to nervous tissue. Oh, my screen sharing is being paused. You can't see the screen. Give me 1 second. Let me see why it's being paused. Can you see it now?
Yes.
Okay. So nervous system. Chapter 12. So neurology is a branch of medical science that deals with the normal functioning of the nervous system. The neurons are nerve cells, and the neuroglia are cells that support the neurons. Here's the neurons. Here's the neuroglia, at least the neuroglia, 3 of the different types of neuroglia in the central nervous system. There's 2 main organ systems that are dedicated to maintaining internal coordination / homeostasis. The endocrine system communicates via chemical messengers secreted in the blood. The nervous system employs electrical and chemical means to send messages, such as neurotransmitters, very quickly from cell to cell. Endocrine system tends to be slower to respond, but is more longer lasting. It's always slower to respond, but longer lasting. So one is working by electrical signals and very small gaps between cells to move electrical signals and chemicals from cell to cell. Endocrine system works by secreting hormones into the blood that will eventually flow around and reach their target. It's a lot easier to stop the quick chemical signal or quick electrical signal than it is to stop the hormone once it's flowing around, because then it has to be degraded. So the endocrine system may be slower to initiate an effect, but the effect is longer lasting. The nervous system is quicker to get developed to result in a response, but it's not as, it doesn't last very long. It's temporary, very, very temporary. So the nervous system carries out its processes in 3 basic steps. We have sensory organs that receive changes and information about changes in the body and in the environment and transmit the coded messages to the brain. So changes in the environment in the body are sensed and then submitted to the central nervous system. The central nervous system processes that information by relating it to past experiences and determines what the appropriate response should be. Should it respond or should it not respond? How much should it respond? Then the central nervous system issues the command and carries out those responses. If you look here, step 1 here, this is, we always call a sensory neuron an afferent neuron. And like to think of afferent as meaning incoming. Afferent. Afferent in this case is incoming. Incoming. Efferent is outgoing. So in the case of the nervous system, the incoming signals are always sensory signals. And the outgoing signals are always motor signals. How are we going to respond? And then the central nervous system processing is an integration center. There's two major divisions to the nervous system. We have the central nervous system, which includes the brain and the spinal cord. We have the peripheral nervous system, which includes the cranial nerves and the spinal nerves. Cranial nerves come directly off the brainstem. Cranial nerves coming directly off the brain from the brainstem. There's 12 to 11 pairs, or 11 and a half, and we'll talk about that when we talk about the cranial nerves, which I think is in the next chapter that we cover. The spinal nerves directly emerge off the spinal cord. And these are all part of the peripheral nervous system. So the central nervous system includes the brain, the spinal cord enclosed and protected by meninges, which are the layers of tissue that, connective tissue that surround the brain and the spinal cord. They're continuous. The layers that surround the brain are continuous with the layers that surround the spinal cord. And the vertebral column. So the meninges just surround the brain and the spinal cord. The rest of the protection comes from the cranium bones and the vertebral column around the spinal cord. The peripheral nervous system is all the rest of the nervous system. That's composed of nerves that are bundles of nerve fibers, aka axons, wrapped in fibrous connective tissue, and that emerge from the central nervous system through foramina of the skull and vertebral column, and carry signals to and from other organs of the body. The ganglia or ganglion are not like swellings where the cell bodies of the peripheral neurons are located. So the peripheral nervous system is composed of nerves and ganglia. Central nervous system, brain and spinal cord, enclosed by the meninges, the cranium, and the vertebral column. The peripheral nervous system can be divided into two major divisions. A sensory division, remember these are the incoming afferent neurons. So sensory division, which includes the visceral sensory division, visceral meaning organs. So this is the internal organs. So sensory neurons that are giving information about what's occurring in the internal organs. Somatic sensory division is what's occurring in the muscles, the joints, and the skin. Somatic meaning more surface voluntary. The motor division are the efferent neurons or the motor neurons that are involved in the visceral motor division, meaning affecting the organs, and the somatic motor division affecting the sympathetic and the visceral motor. This is somatic motor. Excuse me. Let me back up. Somatic motor division is unconscious, conscious voluntary movements. So this is going to involve motor neurons that are going to go out and activate skeletal muscles that are voluntarily controlled. Maybe some cardiac, but it's mainly voluntary. It's all voluntary. And if you've ever thought about it, and the reason I say it's all voluntary, even though it can affect your cardiac muscle, which is technically involuntary. Have you ever been able to slow down your heart rate? People who easily have panic attacks have been trained how to slow things down. That's voluntary. The visceral motor division is involuntary. So this is sympathetic, and it occurs in two different divisions. The sympathetic division and the parasympathetic division. Sympathetic division is your fight or flight. You see a bear, you're hiking on a trail, you see a bear in front of you, and you decide whether you're going to run or you're going to defend yourself. Personally, I'm going to run. Parasympathetic is rest and digest. Okay, we don't have a bear anymore. We're good. Now let's think about digestion and absorbing our food and needing to go pee after we've run away from the bear. So this is involuntary. And then we also call this your autonomic nervous system because it happens automatically. You don't have to think about how you're going to control it. So the sensory afferent division of the peripheral nervous system, right here, carries signals from different receptors to such as sense organs and simple sensory nerve endings to the central nervous system, informing the central nervous system of changes within their body. Two divisions. The somatic sensory, which carries signals about the skin, the muscles and the bones and the joints. The visceral sensory division carries signals about the viscera, meaning your organs in the thoracic and abdominal cavities. The motor or efferent division, remember that's right here, carries signals from the central nervous system to gland or muscle cells that carry out the body's responses. The effectors are organs and cells that respond to these signals. The somatic motor system carries signals to skeletal muscles. So this is specifically voluntary, as well as some autonomic reflexes, involuntary reflexes. The visceral motor division or autonomic nervous system carries signals to glands, cardiac muscle, smooth muscle. It's usually involuntary and operates at an unconscious level. The responses here are called visceral reflexes. It's always happening on an unconscious level. You have some autonomic reflexes that have to do with your skeletal muscle that it occurs without you ever even thinking about it. How many of you curl your hair with a curling iron?
Probably a lot of us.
On a rare
Right.
occasion.
Erin or Miranda, have you ever grabbed the wrong end of a curling iron?
Oh my God, yeah.
Entirely too many times.
How many times? What happens when you do that?
My skin bubbled up and it burned. I had like a
Ouch.
degree burn.
Okay, what happens
Some
right
cussing
after
involved
you did it?
sometimes.
It
Cease.
burns. It hurts. It hurts
Oh,
so
yeah.
bad. Like you got to run it under cool water for like an hour and a half because it's your
Ouch.
hand. Does not
Wowzer.
matter.
That's a good burn. What? Ouch. But how long did it take you to drop the curling iron?
Oh, it was my left hand, so like I literally like watched myself do it, and then it took me like a good 10 seconds to realize what I did, and then I like threw it. So it got my hand pretty good because it was like I wasn't used to grabbing with my left hand because I'm right-handed.
Miranda, we knew you were odd. Most people, when they do that outside of Miranda, most people, when they do that, immediately drop it. It's an autonomic reflex for you to drop it, controlled by your somatic motor division. Outside of Miranda, it's an autonomic reflex to drop it. The autonomic, yeah, actually, let's cover this really quick and then I'll let you go here. The autonomic visceral motor, this is what visceral motor division, remember this is right here, is involuntary. Two subdivisions. The sympathetic, which arouses the body for action. It's their fight or flight. Am I going to run or am I going to fight? Accelerates the heartbeat, increases their airflow, respiratory airflow, but is going to inhibit digestion. Parasympathetic division has a calming effect. It's going to slow the heart rate, but stimulate digestion. One thing that we'll talk about when we talk about the autonomic, which is coming up in a couple of chapters, is that when you are stressed, you cannot pee. You can't urinate when you're really stressed because it's a parasympathetic response. I will see you guys later. I'll talk to you later and next week.
Bye.
All right, bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Have a
Good
good
one.
weekend.
Okay, you too. Courtney, Jessica, or Bianca, are you still here? I'm gonna end the video, the meeting.